Hi, and welcome to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast for athletes, coaches, and professionals who want to achieve their goals faster. I'm Dave Charlton, and I'll be sharing proven methods from leading athletes, coaches, and experts that will help you get the most from your talent. Today's show is sponsored by Functional Intelligent Training, who are a sports injury clinic located in Gosforth near Newcastle upon Tyne and specialise in athlete development, nurturing future champions, strength and conditioning support and excellent rehabilitation services. Big welcome to today's episode where I'm joined by Dave Algeo. Dave I've known for a number of years now. He's a great speaker and author who creatively uses vegetables as metaphors in his brilliant work supporting individuals and organisations to improve their well-being. So welcome, Dave.
Cheers, thanks, David. Yeah, I often wonder what people think if they've never heard that. He uses vegetables creatively.
That's right, radishes and sprouts, which I'm sure we'll touch on down the line in the episode.
Yeah.
So as well as radishes and sprouts, we're going to discuss why it's vital for decision makers and organisations to treat employee well-being with respect and seriously, and then the impact it can have on the wider organisation. So as somebody who's been on the receiving end of working in some really good organisations in that respect and some awful companies, and I also went on to manage staff, now I support organisations as well. I'm really looking forward to digging into this topic. Before we get started, do you want to just explain a little bit about you and your work?
Yeah. As you said, I do a lot of speaking and training and now webinars as we're currently in lockdown phase. And it's all around, for me, it's around success with well-being. And the with is the italics bit, success with well-being, not at the expense of. Because I think that's one of the challenges we have, many of us, is that we kind of almost have a default thing if it has to be one or the other. And the well-being's the soft and fluffy, and the success is the hard and glamorous or whatever. It's the bottom line, it's everything. And the background that I come from is here, firstly, sort of personally managing anxiety and not really knowing what the heck anxiety was at the time, or that it was anxiety, managing that personally the majority of my life. And being a police officer professionally as well, professional police officer for 22 odd years, and leading people in that role as a sergeant and acting inspector on occasions when they trusted me. And in those roles, managing myself personally, I found myself coping in not so healthy ways. Drinking heavily, shutting down, closing off, not asking for help, all of the classic things that many of us do, but I guess particularly blokes. But also seeing that in organisations, this culture of almost putting that well-being further down the list of priorities whilst we get on with the job at hand. And let's be right, something like, I guess, policing and emergency services, you do have a job to do, and we all go to work to do something and contribute something. It always struck me as really challenging and really, I had a problem with the fact that we would, people would burn out doing something that was really, really important. And actually the cost of that, surely, and this is before I kind of did any research, surely the cost of training somebody, or recruiting somebody, and then effectively exhausting them in the role through lots of different reasons, the stuff that they dealt with, the way that they were managed and led, just the shift patterns and the working conditions, all those kinds of things, to have them then, and not everybody, but have a proportion of them struggle through sickness, absence, perhaps burnout, or even worse, morally wasn't right, but also it just didn't make sense from a business case, surely. So I kind of had that question ringing in my ears, and noticing how I was coping was not always the best. And in a culture at the time in the police, which has shifted, and it did shift across my service to the positive, that it was a culture where it was not the done thing to talk about your feelings or to open up or to say you're struggling. You'd finish your shift and go to the pub, have a few beers, and that's how you coped. And that was the thing that probably sowed the seeds for really where I'm at now. Did a range of different roles. I was family liaison for quite a long time on a murder inquiry, and a very rewarding role, working with a wonderful family under terrible circumstances. But around that, I didn't realize what was happening to me, and the culture of you finish the day with the debrief and then head off to the pub, and you don't talk about any of this. I had no idea what it was doing to me until months later, I was looking back on that role and realizing just how much it had affected me, how dark my life had become, how much heavier my drinking had become, how much my relationships were struggling. And it was one of those where, and I know they do offer this support now, back then, for any role around that, but particularly family liaison roles, there was no training, there was no support, it was kind of just go and do it. You wear these multiple hats as a family liaison officer, and good luck with it, And don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking them, because the organisation itself was a fantastic organisation, very people-focused, but I think it was very much of at the time, very much of the age of, I don't think anybody really fully understood or believed or accepted that mental health was an issue or stress was an issue. And it was emerging and growing over my time in my service that we started to understand it. But I think we're still learning now. I think organisations are still learning now. So that's what fascinates me. A long way around.
That's really interesting. I'm going to come at this from a sporting analogy. Obviously, you're a sports psychologist. So if you think of a top Olympic champion, for argument's sake, how could they possibly perform to their maximum, say 100-meter runner, performing under 10 seconds if potentially they've had a marriage breakup or something's going on in their life, the house has been recently broken into, little things like that. So like you say, well-being and performance do, no doubt about it, go hand in hand. The model I utilize is the mental toughness model, which Peter Clough and his colleagues have exhausted over 100 articles in health, education, business around the world. And I mean, what they say and what they've found is that mental toughness, or certainly elements of mental toughness, have up to 25% variation in performance, as well as also having a positive impact on well-being. That says enough for me that, companies should go on to value these concepts. So what do you think stops them?
My experience, actually, and maybe because I now work for myself, and I've got the privilege of working with organisations that, to an extent, I can also choose to work with rather than not. Is that I think there is a lot of will and a lot of growing. There's a growing understanding and appreciation of this area. So I painted that picture, and that was it was decades ago. I do think that there is still probably a culture that, we talk about this idea of toughness, that you have to tough it out, that you have to just get through, that you have to park that human and emotional side of things. I'm not saying that's the mental toughness model, because it's clearly not. But it's like, you work hard, you play hard, and the emotional aspect is not really seen or appreciated as something that is integral to you as a human being, as an effective person at work in your life, but also in terms of your well-being. And I think shifting that culture is it's a big job, because we have worked in that, the culture of not taking breaks. If you leave the office early, then you're slacking off, that kind of thing. I think we do need to challenge that, and I think that's where there's still stigma around it. The more forward-thinking do recognise that, and I do work with a lot of the bigger employers in public sector, and I think by virtue of the fact that they're public sector and therefore they're more publicly accountable, but also they have more employees, and therefore any problem shows itself up in bigger numbers. They seem to be more bought into the idea that actually this is something we need to work on. We do need to provide a good working environment. We need to support our staff and take an interest in what our staff are saying about how they're feeling and what the problems are. And that's the essence, that's the starting point of organisations starting to shift in the right direction and shift their culture, I think.
Yeah, I think you hit on something there for me, where you talk about commitment and drive, and obviously people, doing and not really taking a step back. Obviously, it's a great quality, isn't it? Let's face it, to be able to work hard. But what are the downsides of not stopping and just keeping on going?
Yeah, well, you'll know from your mental toughness work as well. It's well demonstrated, isn't it, that if there's a very simple model, I can't off the top of my head remember who to attribute it to, but it's a balance, wear and repair. It's like almost like a seesaw. I don't know if you've seen it. And I'm kind of doing this on an audio. I'm up and down my hands like a seesaw here, if you can imagine that. But whenever we wear, as in use and use the tools or the energy then we need time to repair. We need to refill the coping reserves and fill the tank. You know, if we're going to drive the car, we need to put more fuel in the tank and change the tires every so often. Otherwise, what's going to happen? And that's the same thing for human beings. So, you know, if we don't take that time to recognize that, yeah, hard work on the right things with which has meaning and impact, and I can see it's worthwhile, that's important. But recognizing that taking those breaks, that downtime, is valuable to recharge the batteries, the physical, emotional, and psychological batteries, that there's an important need to communicate and connect with others as part of that, a social kind of psychosocial support. That's all part of the mix. And that if we don't, and if we neglect that area, then we're heading to burnout. And that physical, emotional, psychological burnout can be years in the making for some, and it can be quite catastrophic and take a lot of recovery.
If we think about the working day, a lot of people have got a 37.5-hour week contract. So they're supposed to work a 7.5-hour day.
Yeah.
Supposed to work a 7.5-hour day. Yet a lot of organizations they'll be looked down upon if they stretch the half an hour break to an hour break or longer. Yet the way you're talking there straight away, if you do take a chunk of a break there, the likelihood is you're going to be more efficient in the way you go about your business. Absolutely.
I guess it depends on the kind of break in terms of the quality of it for yourself. So, you know, this is where, when you look at a lot of the work that's being done around well-being, and particularly in employment and engagement areas, it's that there's an emphasis placed on flexibility and a sense of autonomy. You know, so the individual having a sense of autonomy and control over their own working circumstances and environment becomes important, because if we rigidly say, right, at such and such a time, you take your break come hell or high water, that might have been fine in something where it was more manual labor, there was less cognitive or emotional strain put into it. But if you are enforcing it at a time when somebody thinks, well, I'm in the middle of something and I just can't leave it, then that break, and their head's still in the work, but they're taking a break, is not as valuable. Do you know what I mean? So it's about education and encouragement that, you know, okay, so this is the outcome. We want to manage by outcomes rather than just time in the chair or attendance. What are the outcomes? What are we trying to achieve here? And how does that contribute to the bigger picture? Because we all need, there's a lot of research and literature that kind of indicates that having a sense of purpose, seeing that we're contributing to a bigger picture, really is part of, you know, can nurture that well-being and that sense of performance as well and effectiveness. So this is how you're contributing. This is what we're looking for from yourself. How you go about it is if I'm kind of putting myself in a manager's position, let's work together on how we do that. Let me help you kind of work out what your skills and strengths are. Let's see where we can kind of develop the areas that need developing or manage them. But what do you hand over a bit of power and help them work within their strengths, capacities, and their attention and their you know, what's going on in their lives? Because if we don't, and we rigidly impose things like breaks, they're going to be less valuable than somebody saying, right, do you know what, I just need 5 minutes now, that's all I need 5 minutes to go out and get my head clear. That could be the thing that they need for that particular, you know, activity or break. You know, and a break isn't necessarily a complete rest. It's a step away to get perspective and a reframe and a chance just to go, you know, how was I doing on that? What was I doing? Do you know, I should be focused on this instead of that. If I did that, it would mean that would be unnecessary, you know, that kind of thing, that reflection.
Yeah, that's great. That is, like you say, because if you just continue on that treadmill, then you don't ever just take that little step back, do you? And like you say, reflect on the positives of the current situation, how potentially you can do things better. You talked about, I suppose, in terms of reflection as well, and which links with the point you mentioned before, is how you supported that people's important, but can be neglected because often senior people just want to do. What sort of message and what sort of impact does that leave on the wider workforce?
Yeah, this comes into the culture, doesn't it? I mean, for me, that culture of success with well-being is about how do we create an environment where we see our colleagues, particularly those in that driving that strategic or senior level, as fellow human beings and colleagues, as well as the people that are, well, hopefully not godlike. I mean, I know when I was in the police, I used to see somebody with 2 pips or a crown on a thing as God, and that was a throwback from the old militaristic kind of heritage of policing. And actually, if we can see these people as they're, kind of strip away the rank and kind of build a culture where we can feel that, they're doing this, they're working towards the same goal as me, they've got a different role, and actually they're presenting, so going back into that position of that person, they're turning up at these meetings, for example, or they're having a conversation with, we're talking about this in the context of the lockdown, but if we're back at work and they're in the office and they have a conversation as they pass by your desk or something, they are taking an interest in you as the person, as well as just the person, the things you're outputting. And they're also connecting as a human being, because I think that can help contribute to the idea of, we're all human beings, we're all working towards a goal, we all have different roles, but it's okay to say when you're struggling. Do you know what I mean? And that human connection is really important. And being open to have somebody say, I am struggling, can be quite scary, I guess, for some senior managers, or any manager, it can be uncomfortable, but actually, counterintuitively, it can be one of the best things we can do.
Yeah, because you're showing the human side, aren't you, as a leader in that respect. When I've looked like well-being, you're looking at autonomy, that sense of connectedness, and then also competence would be the 3 key areas that I would personally focus on. And if individuals can get a nice blend of those 3 in their day-to-day, they're likely to feel a lot better in themselves. So we'll take it back to autonomy. Let's face it, the opposite of being in control is feeling very helpless. And as an employee, if you're very helpless, then you're not going to be in a good place to do good, productive work.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah. I think one of the models that I often use when I'm delivering me vegetables, the cabbages and the sprouts and the radish, is the demand support control model, which is what can lead to psychological strain at work is a combination of high demands, and let's be right, life and work is full on demanding from lots of areas, including the stuff we had in our head. But the second area is lower control, or a low sense of control. And in the literature, it talks about decision latitude, which is effectively the scope of my ability to make a decision about what I do, when I do it, how I do it. And that, when that is low, or I perceive I have it very low, then I'm going to feel strain, because that autonomy is really important. Now, we all know there's different, some people just want to be told, just do X, Y, and Z, because that's the job that they contracted to do, or, back in the day, they've done it for that many years or whatever. They're not invested in the job in anything other than a paycheck. But I think a lot of us want more than that. And part of that is that sense of, right, okay, well, can I do this the way that I want to do? Yes, I understand you need to check and we need to just make sure I'm on the right track. But if I can work on it in my own way, then that's more empowering. It's developmental. It's developing that sense of learned effectiveness rather than the learned helplessness. You do find that with, the micromanaging of stuff. It's a universal thing. The vast majority of people hate being micromanaged. And that micromanagement is effectively taking away the control. Here's what I want you to do. Here's how I want you to do it. And I check every 2 seconds to make sure you're doing it that way. And I think that's the challenge. So yeah, I think you're right. Autonomy is a key part of it. We can give back a sense of control and empower the individual to make their own decisions. And that might involve a bit of coaching from the manager or whatever to help them develop that confidence in it, especially if they haven't been managed that way. That can be, it can take a little bit of time, but I think it's incredibly important.
If you think about it, everybody on the planet is completely unique. They've got their own strengths. They've got their own weaknesses, obviously, learning styles. So yeah, certainly that one size fit all approach isn't going to be helpful at all, is it?
Yeah.
You've got to really find out what makes people tick, and how they learn, and what their goals, what their why is, in effect.
Yeah, and we all have a why, don't we? I mean, even somebody that you think, well, they say they're only here for the money. You dig a bit deeper and get to know them. There's often a lot more there than that, and that's what we're talking about. And I don't get it wrong. As somebody who's managed people and led people for lots of years, I understand that when the stress is on, as a manager, you're experiencing that exact thing. High demand, low control. And the third element is low social support, actually, in that model. But the middle bit is when you feel less control as a manager, the temptation is to over-control other things and the things you can, including the people, because it gives you a sense of control back. So it works at different levels. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of recognizing as a manager that you need it yourself, that level of autonomy, but so do your people. And that can be hard when you're pushing time and deadlines. And, you know, how many times is it easier as the manager to say, to think about delegation and think, oh, it's just easier if I do it myself, or I'll just tell them. I'm not going to give them, because then I'll have to show them, and of course it takes more time. But it's about investing that time can really pay back dividends later in the short and medium term, never mind the long term.
When you go into an organization delivering well-being programs around mental health, obviously the return on investment is really important for organizations. How can you go about measuring that?
That is the question and the challenge. And I've been in business about 14 years, and I know that there's more there to support answering those questions now than there was when I first started. And it was one of those classic things as somebody new in business. Well, how can you show the benefits to the organization? And there wasn't a lot of good evidence to show the return on investment. And it's been really good to see the research that's come out and the drive and the initiatives that have started to evidence that there is a definite return on investment. And one of the best things, actually, and I think this is just, I use it because it's a good report. It's got a good basis of research underneath. It's the Stevenson Farmer report, Mental Health at Work, and it came out in 2017. It's a review on mental health and employers. And that was commissioned by Theresa May back in early 2017 and published in October 2017. Not long before the B word happened, Brexit. So I kind of got a bit distracted out of that. But what that lays out is not only a bunch of recommendations, but it laid out some of that evidence that anybody who is seeking to convince somebody of the case for investing in mental well-being in an organization can use. And I'm talking about that from, if you are somebody like me who's a trainer and speaker and going into organizations, but if you are HR or OD or L&D and you're looking to convince other people, the decision makers, this could be really useful. And in effect, what it's showing is that it is a very complex thing to measure, because there are so many different variables in there. But the Deloitte research underneath this report picked out some really good quality research findings that pretty much identified that the return on investment of a wisely spent pound, should we say, if we talk about money, a wisely spent pound in this area can yield a return of anything from £1.50 to £9. Now, that's a big range, so the average is about £4.50. So if you look at that range, that shows that if we do spend something, invest something, and I'm talking about the cash, never mind the stuff that doesn't necessarily take cash, but if we do spend that money, it has a return on investment in improving mental well-being, but on the bottom line of an organization. Reduced sickness absence, less kind of impact of bullying, and the things that affect productivity in the workplace, so engagement and happiness at work and feeling connected and what have you. So there's a lot of different aspects to that. So investing in it, there is some good evidence there to show return on investment. That's the business case. I mean, you've got the moral case, and I think most of us as human beings are a lot more aware these days of the impact of mental health on ourselves and at least one other loved one in our lives. I'm sure we've all been touched by it in some way. So I think there is a lot more of a motivation amongst us as just human beings, never mind hard-nosed business people, to focus on this from a moral case as well. And there are some legal kind of requirements as well around it, but I prefer to sort of stick to the heart and the head side of things as well as just the legal.
We'll look to wrap up in a few minutes, but we'll continue that theme about the heart side of things.
Yeah.
Maybe think of someone in a role. If they're confident, they're feeling happy, they're in control of their emotions, they're committed, they're motivated. When changes occur in organizations, they've got a can-do attitude towards it, then it's a win-win, isn't it? Really, they're going to be much more productive. And if you've got hundreds of people like that in your organization, then the teams pull together, the whole organization pulls together, and happy days.
Yeah. It is. I mean, if you've got a woman, well, then you may look at that person and think, right, well, okay, so what is it that they're not doing, and what's the issue with them? Now, I'm not saying that's the healthy approach. There's more to it. But if you've got teams or areas or departments that are kind of like that, then you're looking at the bigger picture of culture, of leadership style, management style, as well as, you know, what we can do to individually develop. So you're right. If we can kind of tap into how do we create a working environment that is, you know, big on meaning and purpose, it's good communication, it's got a culture of well-being and working well and safe and healthily, and one where people are happy is probably the wrong word, but they know that if they struggle, they who to turn to, and that it's okay, that it's safe for them to say, I'm struggling here. And if we can create that, then you've got a recipe for an organization or a team, a department that could really just rock the world, you know, rock their purpose and achieve things massively, and be more flexible and adaptable, not just because that individual has got the capability of handling change, but because they've got people around them. They've got the social support where if something gets them down on a day, we've all had those days, there are other people around them who aren't going to be sharing the misery. They're going to be there, they're going to be empathetic, they're going to be supportive, but they're going to be wanting the best for them and moving, you know, picking people up and helping them get back on track, you know, in life and work, you know.
Yeah, and on that last point, we all need a little bit of that, don't we? Some support.
Yeah.
I know it's talked about a lot in the media or social media, the press these days about just talking help. We all certainly do need it, no doubt about it. And what are the benefits of talking?
There's a lot of evidence around that. An anecdotal sort of example from my life within the police was one of I had a bit of a personal kind of catastrophe, or whatever, if you like, about 13, 14 years service. I was in the training department, and I rang up my boss and said, look, I'm in bits, I can't come to work here. And it was basically down to a marriage breakdown, you know. It kind of hit that point at that time, and it was his response that nailed really what it's all about. His compassionate, understanding response on that phone call was, he wasn't trying to pick it through at that time. He wasn't trying to get into the bones of it, but he was compassionate and human. He understood the pain I was in. He gave me the support he needed. He followed up. And then when I got back to a point where I could sit with him and have a conversation, he was a human being in front of me as well as my manager. And that's what we're talking about, you know. It can be very uncomfortable, can't it? For any of us, if we're not experienced at it, whatever, to have somebody cry in front of you or struggle or say they're struggling, it can feel really uncomfortable. And I think, yes, managers could do with some support and guidance on how to handle that and how to have a conversation. But it's also recognizing that it's one person sitting in front of another, and they're human beings. And if we can just connect and even sit quietly with somebody whilst they're struggling, we don't have to fix them there and then. Just listening can be really powerful. That's the power of psychosocial support. That's the power of human connection.
Yeah, you hit a key there where you talk about listening, because people can fall into that trap, can't they? When they do want to fix and they just offer solution after solution. Often just that. I was going to say that arm around the shoulder. You can't do that at the moment, unfortunately, with social.
Meter away, or 2 meters away. No, but you're right. I think it's coming from an admirable place, and as somebody who wants to fix people, you know, I'm driven by that. I've had to learn that that's not my job, you know, that, and adopt a more of a coaching style. And as a manager, a coaching style includes just holding back, just listening and being present sometimes to it, and then asking a question or offering a solution, but just slow down on the fixing and the solutions at times. And so very, very, very powerful.
That's great. So if you were to give the listeners 3 takeaways, listeners being people in senior leadership positions, decision makers in organizations, what would they be about this topic we've discussed?
Right. Well, first thing is to recognize that you'll have your own opinion and perspective and bias on this subject. And that might be shaped by personal experience. It might be shaped by a lack of personal experience around, you know, stress and mental health, because many of us don't necessarily believe it's real until it comes close to home. But despite that, just stop and accept at least that there is a lot of evidence out there. There's a growing wealth of evidence that says that engaged employees are predominantly, they're happy at work, but they're also well at work. And a mentally well workplace, a workplace where it's mentally well, it's not just morally right, but it's great for business, and you may not be convinced, but please accept that there's a lot of evidence out there and start the process of looking into that, if nothing else, because it will be one of the best things you can do, in my view. And the other takeaways, I guess, are start to look at what is your culture like within an organization, and how can we shift that culture to something that is supportive, not afraid to be having these conversations. And I guess with that, let's equip our staff, particularly our managers, with the tools to have conversations. And I mean managers at all levels, not just that team leader level, but all the way through, to have conversations that are empowering, supportive, and can signpost to the right people. Because it's not about turning managers into the office psychiatrists or psychologists. It's about just equipping them the tools to have a conversation and then direct somebody to the support that they need. And they're kind of the three key takeaways, I'd say. If you start on those, if you haven't already, you're well on your way to creating a success with well-being culture.
So number one, firstly, take a step back and do some research around the topic. Don't assume that, I suppose, you've got the answers. Tap into some expertise. Number two is ask the question, how can we shift culture? And then three is equip staff from all levels with the tools that can go on to help the wider workforce.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Dave. So where can people find you on social media or on the World Wide Web?
Well, my website is www.stressedguru.com, and stressed as in stressed out, stressedguru.com. The Stressed Guru is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek nod to the fact that I'm not trying to present myself as an expert with a 6-step recipe for everything. I'm actually a human being just like all of us, and the work that I do is based in that very real, down-to-earth kind of approach. So stressedguru.com, you'll find on there some videos and a contact form, or email me, dave@stressedguru.com, and I'd love to have a conversation if anybody's interested.
Well, you'll certainly have some great answers and some advice for people, no doubt about it.
Cheers.
So, thanks a lot for your time, Dave.
Cheers, David. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
I'd like to give a big thanks to today's sponsors. Functional Intelligent Training, who are a sports injury clinic located in Gosforth near Newcastle upon Tyne, and specialise in athlete development, nurturing future champions, strength and conditioning support, and excellent rehabilitation services. Thank you for listening to Demystifying Mental Toughness today. To sign up for tips and advice to help you be the best that you can be, go to www.sport-excellence.co.uk and sign up to the Mental Edge newsletter.